Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The pressure exerted by the Ukrainian armed forces on the Russian army in Ukraine has reached incredible levels. The counterattacks, which started abruptly last month, passed over critical targets of the Russian army and shocked Putin. Russian President Vladimir Putin began carrying out retaliatory attacks after the latest raids. After these attacks, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched attacks on Ukrainian cities with Iskander cruise missiles. After the attacks on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, Putin stated that these attacks were in retaliation for the attacks on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. However, NATO sensed a serious danger in these attacks and mobilized its troops in Eastern Europe. NATO has recently increased its military presence on the Russian border almost 8 times. There are 9,000 NATO soldiers in Estonia, 9,100 in Latvia, 20,800 in Lithuania, 130,500 in Poland, 15,100 in Slovakia, 24,800 in Hungary, 79,300 in Romania, and 26,900 in Bulgaria. At the same time, a very serious shipment of warplanes and armored vehicles was carried out at the NATO Eastern Bloc. In recent shipments, the U.S. has sent 20 AH-64 Apache attack helicopters to Latvia, 1 squadron of F-22 fighter jets, 1 division M1A2 Abrams tank to Poland. The largest share in the NATO task force belongs to the U.S. Army, and with the latest statements, the presence of the U.S. Army in Europe is over 100,000 troops. In January, it was announced that the U.S. military presence in Europe was around 80,000. With subsequent deployments, this number is estimated to be over 110,000 troops. The United States brought its military numbers in Europe to the point of the Cold War long beforehand. It is stated that the number of U.S. troops in Europe has exceeded 100,000, and that even more troops will need to be sent. Pentagon officials have announced that U.S. troops sent around Europe for special missions may also need to stay in the region for an extended period of time. In fact, some units are thought to be permanent in Eastern Europe, and especially in Poland. It is thought that Russia's inhumane retaliation in Ukraine and the heavy defeats of the Russian army at the front will lead Putin to a great stalemate and infuriate him even more. For this reason, the North Atlantic Alliance, on the one hand, is now taking initiatives for Ukraine to join NATO. On the other hand, it aims to create a great deterrent by turning the Eastern Bloc of the alliance into an impassable wall. For this reason, NATO's eastern fortress Poland is of critical importance in the European defense line. Last week, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made a series of statements regarding the escalation of conflicts between Ukraine and Russia and the madness of Putin as a result of Ukraine's successes. Stoltenberg emphasized that they will absolutely not recognize the annexation of the 4 Ukrainian regions and will stand firm against every unjust move of the Russian army and government and will help Ukraine until the end. Stoltenberg also alarmed the NATO Eastern Bloc and stated more drastic measures would be taken depending on the course of the war, and Russia would be prevented from retaliating against any alliance member. Stoltenberg lashed out at Russia in his remarks and promised more support to Ukraine. New information has been shared about the troops of the 82nd Airborne Division in Poland and the Navy units deployed in the Mediterranean. It is clear from the shared information that NATO has begun to increase the number of its units in Eastern Europe. It is stated that NATO has alerted its troops with the emergency code, especially after the recent vicious attacks. Recent reports indicate that the U.S. Army has mobilized the unit to control air and missile defenses in Europe. A headquarters unit was activated in Sembach, Germany on Thursday to provide command and control to all Army air and missile defense forces under the U.S. European Command, according to a statement from U.S. Army troops in Europe. The headquarters of the 52nd Air Defense Artillery Brigade will report directly to the 10th Army Air and Missile Defense Command. I am very excited to take command of the Army's newest Air Defense Brigade, said Colonel Bruce Bredlow, first commander of the U.S. military 52nd ADA. The mission of the U.S. military and the 52nd Air Defense Artillery Brigade in Europe is uniquely rewarding thanks to our ability to work closely with NATO on a regular basis, Bredlow said. The new Air Defense Brigade was first announced by President Joe Biden at the NATO summit in Madrid, Spain in June. He said the Pentagon is deploying more air defenses in Germany and Italy. The main reason for these installations is thought to be the Iskander cruise missile attacks in Ukraine today. The 52nd ADA will assume responsibility for the 5th Battalion, 4th Air Defense Artillery Regiment near Ansbach, Germany. Also, the future 1st Battalion, 57th Air Defense Artillery Regiment, which will be based near Ansbach, will take their posts. The U.S. Army has begun gradually expanding its air defense in Europe since about 2019, when the 10th AAMDC was upgraded to a one-star command. Previously, the role of the brigade headquarters over the air defense battalions in Europe was alternatively filled by units of the Army National Guard. The addition of the active duty brigade headquarters, along with the new 157 Short-Range Air Defense Regiment, adds significant capacity to the U.S. contribution to the alliance's ground-based air defense at EUCOM, the U.S. Army Europe Command said in a statement. At the same time, the Iron Eagles of the U.S. Army took charge of aviation in Europe. Air Cavalry Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, officially their colors. Combat Aviation Brigade, known as Iron Eagles, first ceremony of authorization at 33rd Air Base was held in Poland. It is stated that the main purpose of these assignments is not to reflect Russia's attacks in Ukraine to Eastern Europe. A Polish Air Force C-130 cargo plane and Mi-17 helicopter held inside a large aviation hangar formed the background of the ceremony, while Iron Eagle's aircraft can be lined up front and center for the ceremony. The ceremony was presided over by Major General John V. Meyer III, commander of the 1st Infantry Division. Local community partners, both military and civilian, have been observed as the air cavern colors are coded for a ceremonial homecoming, and the Iron Eagles unfurl their colors, marking the official start of their rotation. Only brigade and battalion command teams participated in the troop formation. Having redeployed most of its force, 1ACB's senior leaders stayed behind to complete the final task of shaping their colors for the journey home to Texas. Outside of these operations and exercises, U.S. Army artillery reached Latvia as the Allies tried to deter Russia. Service officials said the U.S. Army is sending long-range artillery to Latvia for national combat readiness exercises, as well as local and allied forces. U.S. Army Europe and Africa said it had deployed 2 M142 high-motion artillery rocket systems with a dozen personnel in the Baltic nation, where security concerns were raised after Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine in February. Colonel Richard Ikenna, artillery commander of the 1st Infantry Division, said the mission highlights the Army's ability to take up positions quickly anywhere in the European campaign. It was emphasized that the main reason for this was that NATO forces should be prepared in the face of a possible Russian attack. The HIMARS system entered Army service in 2005. The heavy warheads and rocket range of roughly 50 miles are credited by military analysts as helping to balance Russia's numerical advantage as Ukraine seeks to regain territory east and south. Participating units include the North Korea-based 3rd Battalion, 321st Artillery Regiment Fort Bragg, which was deployed to Germany in February as part of the U.S. effort to support forces in Europe. The soldiers serve under the artillery command of the 1st Infantry Division. The 352nd Special Operations Wing transported HIMARS crews to 2 points in Latvia with C-130 aircraft. The moves are similar to other U.S. Army and Special Operations efforts in Europe over the past 2 years that have emphasized short-term maneuvering of artillery in strategic locations. Even before Russia's attacks on Ukraine in February, adding long-range artillery was a priority for the Army in Europe, as the NATO alliance rebuilt Cold War-era forces against Russian provocations on the eastern flank. Likewise, the reality of how the Russian army was put in a difficult position by the HIMARS stands before us. After the Ukrainian armed forces started to use HIMARS, the balances in Kherson completely deteriorated, and the balance of war began to move in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. Russian President Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, has been trying to be careful in his moves for a long time, seeing this pile of NATO in Eastern Europe. However, after the last raids of the Ukrainian armed forces, Iskander had to use cruise missiles to ensure his superiority. This move mobilized Europe and indirectly NATO. The North Atlantic Alliance has prepared its members sharply and is on alert for a possible Russian attack. If there is a right to intervene in the war in Ukraine, the alliance could be dragged into the war. However, everyone is more cautious, as this will cause the Third World War. Unless Vladimir Putin makes a crazy move, this process will not reach the undesirable point. However, Putin's crazy moves have been showing themselves for the last 8 months, and it's estimated that he can now cross the border. Thanks for watching.